Well, welcome everyone to our session, Onboarding Your Team to AWS. My name is Annie Burgess. I'm the lab director here at ESIP. You've got a couple faces on that you could see right now. Sarah Lafia. Sarah, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself?
Thanks. Hi, I'm Sarah Lafia. I'm a community fellow this year with ESIP. Really excited to be joining the session. I'm part of the Discovery Cluster, and I am currently a postdoc at University of Michigan. I have a background in geography from UC Santa Barbara. So great to meet you all.
Thanks, Sarah. And Joe and other Sarah, do you guys want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Joe Flasher. I'm the Open Geospatial Data Lead at Amazon Web Services. And you will be hearing a little bit more from me in a moment.
Thanks, Joe. Sarah?
And I'm Sarah Lubkin. I'm the Access Program Officer from NASA headquarters. And I'm also the person who's been putting Access after your names if you're an Access PI or co-I or team member. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. So I'm going to keep it brief, but I wanted to let everyone know that we've got this Google Doc that's linked. That's the notes document in Kiko chat. So if you could go ahead in the attendance and check-in and add your name, affiliation, etc. I did want to remind everyone that we do have community participation guidelines. They are linked at the top of this page. You can feel free to add questions to the Zoom chat during our session. And also if you kind of head down in the Google Doc, there are a couple questions. There's AWS questions, and then there's another section that says, please add your lessons learned onboarding your team to the cloud. I would recommend, or I guess I would just request that if you have already started this process, either as a team, a manager, or as an individual to kind of make this transition, be it AWS or any other cloud, to kind of add what you have learned thus far in that process. And it'll make everyone feel better if you're brutally honest about any challenges that you've come upon, or just kind of putting it out there to the group in terms of what you've learned throughout the process. So a little bit about how the session is going to go. I'm going to stop talking pretty quickly, and then I'm going to hand it over to Joe. Joe is going to give a little bit of information about AWS and then answer some specific questions that we had populated for the session before we got started. Then we're going to recognize what themes are coming up throughout the session in terms of common challenges, maybe common questions, and break out into groups so we can have discussion and hopefully some problem solving around those issues. Lastly, just talking about the motivation for the session, both myself, Sarah, and others in NASA and in other agencies, the question of migrating researchers to the cloud comes up over and over and over and over and over again. Within ESIP, I have conversations with people weekly, especially from feds, about as data transition to the cloud, how do we prepare researchers for that transition, and how do we let people experiment with doing their own research, transitioning their team to the cloud. And so this session is really meant to be a practical learning session that you could ask Joe. And we're specifically talking about AWS. ESIP is cloud provider agnostic, but we are excited to have AWS as an active participant. So this will be AWS focused, but again, when we're talking about common challenges of the cloud, I hope people add whatever they're really thinking. So with that, I am going to pass it over, and let's see, do we have Anna yet?
I think she was having trouble getting in, so I think we'll just start with me, Annie.
All right, great, Joe. And so if everyone could mute themselves who isn't going to speak. And again, please feel free to throw questions in chat and add your additional specific AWS questions or lessons learned into that Google Doc. So with that, I will turn it over to Joe. Thanks, Joe.
Awesome. Thanks, Annie. And hey, everyone. Like I said, I'm Joe Flasher. I'm the Open Geospatial Data Lead at AWS. And so in that context, I get to talk to a lot of our customers about how they're making their data available on AWS. Sort of in the context of this meeting, that's mostly USGS, NASA, and NOAA. And then I also talk to a lot of our customers about how they're making use of that data when it's in the cloud. And so that's also including folks at USGS, NASA, NOAA, but then also other research organizations and commercial institutions as well. So I sort of get to talk to a lot of people about how they're making use of AWS for geospatial data. And before I go too far, I also want to let you know that there's another member of my team, Zach Flamig, who's here on the call. So if you have any questions, and if he sees anything in a chat or anything like that, he'll pipe up as well. So we are both here for you. And then Anna, who is the program lead for the Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative, she was having some issues trying to get in, but I think she'll be joining us.
I'm here now, so sorry about that.
Hey, Anna.
Hey, sorry.
So, no, that's all right. So I think, Anna, maybe I'll just go ahead with my part and then we can switch over to your part if we want. Does that sound good?
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome, great. So what I wanted, we were asked to talk a little bit about onboarding your team to AWS. And if you've touched AWS at all, you know that this is sort of a very, a very massive thing, right? So what I wanted to sort of do was take a very sort of stepwise approach. And I don't have a ton of slides. I just sort of wanted to put some things together to give me a little bit of a framework here. But then what I really wanted to do is sort of take the time with you all with your questions, because that's probably going to be most useful rather than sort of just having you sit through a presentation. And so I wanted to start up just to sort of super simply about what the cloud is, because I know there can sometimes be a little bit of confusion around that, and just sort of trying to, in a very simple way, just sort of say what it is. I wanted to talk a little bit about a few relevant services, especially when we're talking about user onboarding and working with different users and accounts. And then I wanted to go to some of the specific questions that we had been given. So I captured some of them as of yesterday, I think, and put them into the slide deck here. But then I know a few others have come in, so we can sort of take a look at the Google Doc and see what questions are there as well at the end. Okay, so what is the cloud? This is sort of the textbook definition of the cloud, at least the first line. It's on-demand access to IT resources. The other piece is pay-as-you-go pricing is a general feature of the cloud. This is as opposed to buying physical hardware that you pay for upfront, right? This is great. This is a very good definition, but I find it to be a little bit confusing sometimes, and it's not really it doesn't really help you sort of practically understand what you're getting into. So the one thing I do want to call out here is the link here at the bottom is going to be your best place for getting started on AWS, and it has links to a whole bunch of different learning pathways if you're a researcher or more of an IT person or a data administrator. There's a whole bunch of different learning paths. As we speak, there's something, I think it's around 175 services that AWS has. So there's obviously a lot to sort of wrap your head around. So just sort of to try and level set a little bit and sort of get you thinking about what the cloud is in a practical sense off of this textbook definition. I'm just going to step through sort of what I think of as the big three services. And these are sort of the on-ramps for how people use, I would say, the cloud in general. And I want to be very clear here that like I said, we're about 175 services now. I'm just going to show you what I think are sort of some of the like foundational three. But I don't want you to think this is all we have, right? That'd be a huge disservice if you leave here and think that these are the only three you have. And there's a lot of services that you might be using that aren't these three, obviously, right? So I'm just sort of giving you sort of from a mental model, sort of the base level three that you can think of. But there's a whole lot of things that have happened since these services initially came out. So I think the first one that I always think of to tell people about is EC2. That's Elastic Compute Cloud. This is essentially buying a computer or renting a computer, leasing a computer in the cloud somewhere else, right? So not on your desktop. So the easiest way to think about this is if you need to do a certain amount of work and you have a desktop computer or a laptop and it has CPU, RAM, and hard drive in it, you can get those same sort of requirements just not sitting on your desktop, right? Or not sitting on your desk. So you can run different operating systems on it. AWS supports Linux, Mac, and Windows OSs. You can get different CPU, RAM configurations. You can get things that are have GPU capabilities. You can get things that have very little memory, but a lot of RAM, right? There's a whole lot of different permutations to this. And what I'm showing here is just if you go into the EC2 service in the console and you say like, I want to spin one of these things up, this is the first screen that you see. So I just sort of wanted to, for all these things that I'll talk about, I'll just sort of give you a look into sort of the first screen that you would see for using that services. The other thing I'll point out with EC2 is that you can share what are called AMIs, they're disk images basically. So the reason why this is important is if you are a group and you have basically gotten the machine that you're using in the state that you want it. So you've installed extra packages, you have data on that machine. There is a way for you to basically take a snapshot, an image of that and share it either with just another AWS account privately or publicly, right? You could say like, hey, this is available for the whole world to access. This is very powerful if you're trying to share code. Right, you can sort of think of this, I don't want to conflate too many things here, but you could sort of think of this as like a Docker, right? Fundamentally different, but you're basically, it's a way that you can share code, and in this case, a whole machine image with other groups trying to make use of the machine. So that's sort of, I think, the easiest concept for people to get with the cloud in general. The sort of first on-ramp for a lot of people is I'm used to sitting at my machine. I type something into the terminal and something happens. I run a piece of code. You can do that same thing, just not on the computer that's sitting in front of you. Next one is S3, simple storage service. So this is an object store. This is different than, say, a file-based storage that you would see connected to something like those EC2 instances. This is sort of network-attached storage, if you will. You can put a whole lot of data into these buckets. So the sort of the container for the storage here is called a bucket, an S3 bucket. You'll probably see that language a lot. And so S3 or object storage in general is sort of the preferred storage for a lot of groups when they're looking to make large amounts of data available. The nice thing here is it's accessible by anyone who you want to make it accessible to. And a lot of cases when we're talking about USGS or NASA or NOAA making their data available in the cloud, they're making that data available through S3. And it has the property that if you make it publicly accessible, anyone can come and work on top of it. While it's not the same as file-based storage, a lot of this has already been taken care of in the tooling. And so if you're underneath the hood, if you're using like popular NetCDF or HDF or GDAL, these libraries to access the data, a lot of them will have support for S3 already built in. So you don't necessarily need to worry about the storage layer so much. If you're writing sort of your own low-level drivers, then you may need to think about how you're accessing the data. So again, sort of virtual compute, that's one sort of pillar. Object storage is another pillar. Third pillar that I think of as sort of a foundational service that a lot of people sort of use to help with their mental model of what is the cloud is RDS. So this is relational database service. RDS helps you spin up various types of relational database services. So MySQL, SQL Server, Postgres is a popular if you're looking at the open source ones. And if you're talking about geospatial things, you can use things like PostGIS as well. But you can basically click the little orange button down there, say create database, you tell it how big you want it to be, and sort of how much power you want to give to the database. Of course, more powerful costs more. And then the instance will start up and you just basically have a database that's running in the cloud that's not tied to your local computer. RDS also takes care of sort of backups and all those sorts of things. So I'm sort of going through these quickly, but all of this is to try and give you a mental model of sort of what the cloud is, right? All of these things are on-demand access to IT infrastructure with pay-as-you-go pricing. So I didn't sort of hit it too much, but when you're using sort of EC2 for the virtual compute, you are paying per time that you're using it. The other thing that I'll sort of point out here, because a lot of you are probably looking to do sort of large-scale processing, the cloud in general, I mean, I only speak for AWS in particular, but this is generally a cloudy concept. It has the property that a lot of the pricing is linear. And so I will sort of always mess this up the first time I try to say it. But if you need to do 10 hours of work, you can either do that in 10 instances in 1 hour, or you can do that at 1 instance in 10 hours. And the price should be relatively the same, right? So you basically have some knobs that you can turn to decide how you want to get this work done. So that's sort of, I mean, like I said, I just showed you 3 out of 175 or so services. There are a whole lot of them that you're never going to have to worry about. There are a number of other ones that probably would be useful for you to look at. I'm obviously skipping over, if you've sort of heard of the buzzword serverless, I'm skipping over anything that's sort of serverless, right? I don't really think that's the purpose of this session. There's services like AWS Batch that actually just run some of these things for you, right? Like Batch will let you run large scale batches of jobs, and it'll run it on different AWS services. And so there are other services that are built on top of some of these services to sort of help you get started and go faster. But I think, yeah, it's a bit outside of the scope of this session to sort of talk about those things. If it comes up during the question period, totally happy to answer it. I just didn't want to sort of throw a million different services out here, and I just kind of wanted to give you an overview of what I think are some of the sort of fundamental ones to help you with a mental on-ramp to what the cloud is. So one of the questions I think that has come up is, you're sort of getting access to credits, or maybe you sort of have to access or manage an AWS account, but you need to give somebody else access to that account. AWS offers a lot of different ways to do pretty much anything. I'm going to go with some of the simpler ways to get some of these things done. So whenever you talk about sort of giving anyone access to an account or privileges on an account, IAM, so it's identity and access management, is what you're going to want to look at. And so I'm just going to step through a quick flow here of how to add a user and how to give them permissions to something. Again, I'm going to keep this pretty high level because you're going to need to dig in here to actually see what all the specifics are. But if you're sort of the administrator of the account, or you have administrator privileges, you can go into IAM and you can add a user. And so you just click the blue button at the top there to say add user. You give them a name. There's 2 different access types that you can give them. You can give them programmatic access and console access. So console is the web-based version of things. Programmatic access is if you know that they're only going to be using it sort of programmatically, and they'll get an access key and an access key ID and a secret access key. Then you can basically send that to them or have it sent to them. If they're getting console access, they'll need to have a password that's generated. And there's sort of rules that you can set up around that as well. So you've now created a user, but by default, a user can't do anything that has no permissions. And so the next thing you need to do is add permissions. There are a number of different ways that you can do this. To be completely, this I would not say is the best practice, but I think it's probably what a lot of you will end up doing. If you're working within trusted teams and you feel comfortable doing this, you can give other people administrator access, right? If the account is used for a specific research project and you're trying to have access to other people working on that research project, you can give them administrator access. But know that they have administrator access, right? You can always go back in IAM and look at who has access. If you want to exert more control over what they have access to, you 100% can do that, right? You can get as granular as you want. And so if we go back to something like that object store example, you can set policies that say this person can only access this one single object that's in that bucket, or they can only access this prefix, or they can write to one prefix and read from another prefix, right? You can get very granular on all these permissions. My guess, though, is a lot of you are just looking for a way to give somebody an account, and then they can also have access to the the account. If you want to do that, sort of the easiest way to do it, but again, not the best practice. The easiest way just to give them administrator access. The other sort of easy way is if you know they're only going to be accessing 2 or 3 services, like they're only going to be accessing EC2 and S3 and some other service, you can give them full privileges just for those services, right? So this would prevent them from going and sort of using some other service that they're not supposed to. So again, I guess what I want to get across here is the reality is you can get as granular as you want with these policies. you can write your own. What I'm showing you here is sort of AWS managed policies that are sort of pre-built policies to do a certain thing, but you can create your own policies. And so best practice is to give people the least amount of privilege that they need to do their job. You can also give them administrator access if there is trusted party and the account's only used for sort of a certain research project. If there are any IT people on the phone, they're probably cringing right now, so I apologize. The next service that people might not think of as a service that I wanted to hit real quick that you may run into is AWS Organizations. And so this is a way that you can link accounts. And so the parent account is basically sort of the top level account. And then that parent account can invite other accounts to the organization. I think the main reason why you all may be interested in organizations is to give people separate accounts, potentially with different privileges, but have the credits all flow up to the same parent. Organizations can be used for much more than that. The parent organization account can set sort of system-wide policies that flow down to all of the organizational children accounts. My guess is you who I'm speaking to right now probably aren't going to be in that position, right? I think that's much more of a systems administrator, deeper IT sort of thing. But for you all, organizations is potentially helpful because you can have people create separate accounts with separate responsibilities, and they can all sort of flow up, at least the credit sharing can all sort of flow up to the top level account. Yeah, so, and just so you know, AWS accounts are free, right? That doesn't cost, like the fact of having an account doesn't cost anything. You can sort of think of it as a unit of administration. But it's not like each account carries like a per account fee or anything like that. You just pay for services, not for the accounts. So I should also say a question. Some of you may have questions that are going to be very hard for any of us on the Amazon side to answer because they're going to come down to how your IT people are using AWS. And this is sort of one of them. If you all are using accounts that are already created by your organization, it will, like, you're not going to have all these privileges, right? If you all are creating sort of accounts that you own, then you will have these privileges. So I'm sort of coming at this from you own sort of the root of the account privileges. But of course, if you're sort of sitting within an organization that has given you an account, you're sort of on the downstream side of these things, and you might not have access to all of these sort of mechanisms. The other one that'll be super useful for you is AWS Budgets. So this is true in general, but especially true when you have credits. If you ask for a certain amount of credits, well, just in general, Budgets is fully featured. Like, you can go super crazy within the billing console here. And you actually get to the billing console up in the top right of the screen. You can basically click your little drop down up under your up in the top right there and go to my billing dashboard. And it's got a ton of different things here. The Cost Explorer is super interesting. But the Budgets piece lets you set alerts. So if you know that you should only be using a certain amount of money, or you only want to be spending a certain amount of money, or if you want to be spending like no money, right? You can set a $0 budget, I believe. And then when the budget can do forecasting, or it can do actuals. And basically, whenever any of those thresholds are breached, you can set different ways for it to notify you, right? So it's just a general good practice to sort of set up budgets. If you're using credits and you don't want to outspend your credits, it's good. But for example, I run a personal website on AWS. I have for years. I think it cost me about $2. I have a budget that says if that goes above $4 a month, then alert me, because something has gone wrong, right? Like, I don't know what's happening, but I should not be charged more than the $2 because it's been $2 for years now, right? And so it's very easy just to set up a quick little budget, and it saves you from sort of running into finding about issues after the fact, because you see a bill show up. So regardless of whether you're using credits or not, budgets are always a good thing to set up for your usage. And in general, if you just sort of want to look at sort of how your resources are being used, the Cost Explorer is always super interesting to take a look at. Yeah, so I think I will. Well, okay, I'm going to hit these, and then I want to talk about credits here in a second. Just some other services of interest, because I actually saw them come up in some things that were mentioned to us. these are, so all the sort of services that I've been talking about here are sort of, they're monitoring services or control services. And so AWS Control Tower and AWS Service Catalog, they sort of came up from one of the folks in the group here, but I think that's probably going to be a mismatch for what you're trying to do and sort of the level of granularity that you want. If you were sort of a large scale enterprise and you needed to set up these accounts for hundreds of thousands of people across your enterprise, you would probably want to use something like Control Tower because it makes it very easy to keep setting up these accounts with all the permissions set up and everything like that. Similarly, Service Catalog will let you choose a bundle of services that people can see. So for example, we have a service to get satellite data from satellites, right? If you're like Netflix, for example, well, they might. If you're a certain customer, you don't want your people to be able to see the service to get satellite data because it doesn't make any sense for you, right? So there's a way that you can basically say, hey, our people can only access these curated set of services, right? My sense is that's not going to be of use for any of you. I think these are probably going to be a bit heavier handed services or features than sort of what you're going to need. If that's not true and sort of you want to talk about them, we can totally do that. But I know that the services have been mentioned, and I think they're probably just gonna be a bit more than what you need, because my sense is you probably need to set up an account and maybe one or two others to get other people access. So just some other thoughts real quick before we get into some of the questions, is to know your billing console. I sort of mentioned this, but know the billing console, know where it is, know how to look at it. Within that same billing console, there's an actual credits tab, and so it'll show you your credits and how many remaining credits you have on the account. And the forecast will help you sort of see what your usage is trending at and when you're likely to run out of your credits. And so just a note on credits, all the services have most of the services have a price associated with them, and it's all public, right? There's nothing private here. All of it's just, there's public pricing that you can see on the service page. Credits are just, you get a dollar amount in credits, and they just cover a dollar amount of usage. So if I wanted, like in a very easy example, I need to do 10 hours of processing. I know that 10 hours of processing will cost me $10. I would ask for $10 in credits. I get the $10 in credits. I apply them to my account. It says you have a balance of $10 in credits. I go and use the processing. And basically every dollar of processing gets taken against that bucket of credits. And when the credits are up, then that starts flowing back to either, there has to be some payer for the account. If you set the account up yourself, it's a credit card. If you have sort of a more of an enterprise account, then somewhere up the line, there's some payment mechanism that's linked to the account. So credits are just basically, credits come in dollars, and it's a one-for-one match. There's nothing, it's not like airline miles or something, right? So every dollar of usage goes against a dollar of credit. So nothing too mysterious there. So I do have some questions, I have some questions from you all that I can go in, and I sort of want this to be more free form. So Anna, if you think it makes sense, maybe I can break here. And then would you want to go, and then we can come back to these questions so we can sort of end and go on with the question period?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you. All right, let me see if I can share my screen. Oh yeah, you have to. And my camera, unfortunately, is not working. So let's see. Are you guys able to see? Can you see my slides now?
Yep. Yeah, there you go. Looks good.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, everybody. First, apologies that I couldn't quite get in at the beginning. I was having some technical challenges. Anyway, so my name is Anna Privet. I am with the sustainability team at Amazon, while Joe and Zach on the AWS side. Sorry, we work very closely across the organization, but I basically bring the sustainability component to the program. So I lead the programmatic side of the Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative. And so this is really the program that is supporting this relationship with the Access grants and the support with cloud credits. So I wanted to give you a little bit of context for this program, not only to explain, why we're doing this, but also because there's additional resources that we have as part of ASDI that might be beneficial to the work that you guys are doing. So I'm not going to spend too much time here, but just to give you a little bit of a context. So ASDI, the Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative, is really a tech for good program, and it comes in the umbrella of these activities that Amazon is putting out there to tackle the climate change program and other sustainability related issues out there. And so some of you might be aware that Amazon made a big commitment and co-founded the Climate Pledge in 2019. And what we're trying to do as an organization is really to go net zero carbon by 2040, which is 10 years before the commitment of the Paris Agreement. As you can imagine, for an organization like Amazon, this is extremely challenging, given all of the different domains and sectors that we are involved in. And so we set different targets across the organization. One of them very focused on going 100% renewables by 2025, and other immediate goals like having 50% of our shipments being net zero by 2030. So there's a lot of innovation and a lot of turning upside down our processes and operations across the entire organization. So in addition to all the innovation that is happening internally, there's also a big focus on an enablement role. How can we encourage the community to innovate more in this space, right? And so one of the areas where we feel like we could bring a strong contribution is in the data side of things. Is you think about sustainability and global sustainable development in general, and pretty much anything and all the proposals you guys were submitting fall under sustainability because it's such a broad kind of subject. But if you think about it, data and access to meaningful, timely content and information is really critical for all these decisions and these processes in order to monitor and to manage natural resources and human activities and risks and things like that. So where we see playing a role is really on trying to democratize access to data and make it easier for people to analyze it and derive that information that they need. So that's really what ASDI is trying to do, is trying to reduce any costs and time and possible technical barriers that might be preventing people from actually accessing those insights. So in a nutshell, the program is structured around 3 core pillars. And this is the part where it might be relevant for what you guys are trying to do. So the first one is very focused on democratizing access to data. And what we mean by that is that we work with groups like NASA and NOAA and UK Met Office and other what we call authoritative sources of data around the world. And we try to, once we identify what are those key data sets that are critical, for instance, to solve climate change or food security or water management issues, we engage with those data providers and through the open data program that Zach and Joe are engaged in and leading, we basically create an opportunity to use the AWS cloud as a way to distribute the data as an additional mechanism. So what we do is we cover the cost of hosting the data in the cloud and any costs related to egress. So that's one of the ways that we've been bringing data to the cloud and make it freely available to anybody in the world. So that's the component of the data, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. And I'm saying this because there's already an extensive amount of data that you guys can go and look into, in addition to the NASA data that you are using for your proposals. Then on the analytics side, again, how do we bring analytical capabilities and compute to all these places around the world, in addition to the traditional places and the big labs and big universities that have extensive computational capabilities? Can we bring those capabilities to groups in developing countries and even around the US and other places around the world? So that's where the grant program falls in. So we have a sustainability focused grant program. We have a general open call for proposals where anybody can submit a request for support for a period of a year to prototype ideas related to sustainability in the AWS cloud. And under this program, we have made this special arrangement with NASA and with the Access program, so that you guys have this access to this particular grant. And then the third component is also quite important in our point of view, which is how do we encourage knowledge exchange, and how do we encourage all of you that are really familiar with the cloud and solving and dealing with issues related to climate and sustainability. How do we encourage you to share that with others, either through publications, writing tutorials, sharing workshops, or even open your code. So that's something that we take very seriously and believe that can really advance the way that we grow this space together. So very quickly, some examples of some of the organizations we are working with and some of the data. We have data in many different domains inside of sustainability, but we have been preferentially building the weather and climate part of the catalog. We also have an extensive amount of remote sensing data. And just to give you an example, when you go into our Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative portion of the registry of open data on AWS, which is basically the catalog where you can access the data is categorized under different domains, and it looks rather sparse here because I was just looking for NASA data, and we have just recently started working more closely with them. So we have an opportunity to now grow this much broader. But just giving you an example, if you select one of those data sets, the interesting part is that you open a new page where you have some information not only about the data set, but also how can you access it on AWS. But very interestingly as well, I cannot even talk today, is that we encourage users around the community to, again, add their content that is relevant for that data set. So people can submit tutorials and publications and tools and different applications. And so if we accept it, it basically becomes displayed in this page as an additional resource that anybody can access and use. So this is all cool, but the interesting part from our perspective, at least from ASDI point of view, is really what kind of impact is it creating by making these resources available, the data and the grants and the knowledge. And so these are the examples that are really interesting to start to look at, right? That we see, and here I put a few examples actually for a NOAA presentation, and I just want to give you a few cases where, for instance, Solcast is a startup in Australia, and they are using some of the remote sensing data that the ghost data in this case that NOAA is making available on AWS. And they're building workloads to create basically an operational product that looks at forecasting of solar radiance for the solar industry. So there's a practical application in the private sector. A similar one with forecast data, weather forecasts, where a company in Europe, Nautical AI, is looking at forecast data to improve operations in maritime activities. And then I wanted to mention this case that is not, like it happened a few years back, but I think it's still so relevant in terms of the impact of opening access to data, which is the case with the NextRad data, this extensive data set that was stored on tapes on NOAA side. And when we put it in the cloud, with terabytes and terabytes of data, I believe at the time was maybe 300 terabytes of data, which in practice make it really limited the number of people that could use that data set. But once we put it in the cloud and we went through that effort one time, what it meant is that now immediately that data set is available to anyone in the world, instantly. And so some groups of scientists at Cornell did some amazing studies on bird migration, because now I had an inventory of over 25 years of data that they could actually use. And this was a totally unexpected use of the data that it traditionally has been used to study, storms and rainfall and things like that. So that's the exciting part, is to see that when you open access to the data, innovation can happen in unexpected ways, which I guess that's what innovation is. All right, I'm not going to spend too much time in examples, but I just wanted to give you an idea. Even with the VIIRS data that obviously NASA had a key role in putting up there. The World Bank just created a new Light Every Night new product that is now available on AWS and is being extensively used by the World Bank and other groups as well to look at economic development around the world in areas where we have very few data to estimate some of that activity. So. And another example on water management, this time with the Sentinel data, Synergize is actually a for-profit company in Europe, but they created this pro bono product they create on the side using Sentinel data on AWS to allow to monitor the global historical and current data on water resources around the world. So they monitor thousands of dams and reservoirs all over just with this data, and they make it freely available. And then just to give you an idea of other possibilities, although we engage one-on-one, as I mentioned, we have this open call for proposals. We also look for opportunities to engage with groups that we call like boundary organizations, right? So like we are doing now with NASA and the Access program, where we engage with a trusted member of the community, and they can provide access and identify what are those groups that we should be supporting. And an example of that, we did a similar collaboration with a group on Dot Observations, where we committed $1.5 million in cloud credits and selected 21 projects from 17 countries, developing countries that are working on very different projects around the world, like deforestation in Brazil and illegal mining, I believe in Ukraine, and all kinds of different activities. We are now about just over a year into this project. It's a 3-year project, and we're learning a lot. And it's been a very interesting way of engaging with the community. And finally, I'll just mention this one just for if any of the groups here is interested in this kind of activity. But so traditionally we support the community with data, as I mentioned, and credits, but we see ourselves more in an enablement role where we don't actually develop software or applications for the outside world. But in this case, we're actually teaming up with the Linux Foundation and a new project called OS Climate. And OS Climate is really an effort to create an open source platform for climate risk management. It's primarily focused on the investing and financing community, but the core idea is to create a data commons for all the data that is relevant for climate risk assessment. And although that's relevant for the investment community, it would be also relevant for any other sector. So we're doing that in partnership with Allianz, which is the largest insurance company in the world, and Microsoft and S&P Global and others. And so if you guys are interested in this space at all, just reach out, because this is in the early phases, but there's a lot of opportunity to engage and contribute. And again, it's an open source project. So I am going to stop now, and I added a few links here for those that might be interested in exploring further some of the resources that I mentioned. But of course, we are available anytime. If you have any questions, please let us know. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Anna. So I think we wanted to move into the questions part. I know there are already some that were asked. So I think what we'll do is just go ahead and start answering some of the ones that were already asked. I can see the ones that are coming into the doc, and I see people plussing them. So that sort of gives us a good guide to go after. Annie, just a time check, how long should we do this before we think about the breakouts?
Well, I think we had initially said we were going to go for another like 15 minutes on question answering, but we could also, let's poll everyone in 15 minutes, because if the biggest thing they can get out is having you on the hook to answer specific questions, then we want it to be most beneficial for people here. So let's go through some question and answers, and please everyone continue to add questions, because Joe and Zach and the other AWS folks, or if you are an AWS whiz yourself deciding to listen in, maybe if you could add to the document as well. So Joe, why don't you kick it off, and we'll just check in 15 minutes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so the first thing before I do some of the questions is I was looking over some of the best practices or lessons learned. And I do feel like I was potentially a little bit cavalier in the IAM section. So there are some lessons learned in there around IAM. I mean, the best practice for IAM, this is identity and access management again, is to give everyone the least privileges that they need, right? This is a very good thing, especially if you're on any account with any sensitive information. Obviously, I don't want to sort of skirt past this issue. And somebody says it is a full-time job, and indeed it is for large accounts and within sort of large account teams. There is a whole lot to it. So I apologize. I feel like I might have been a little bit cavalier in that section, but there are a ton of good resources around that. Okay, so for the question piece, what I'm actually going to do, scarily enough for me, is I'm going to show you my web browser, because I realize there's probably a resource that's very helpful for you that you may not know about, and this gets a little bit to the question of how much will it cost to store the data. So I can't tell you the answer to that for your exact thing, your exact use case, but I can tell you how to figure it out. And so if I can share my screen here again. There we go. Okay. So you should see my web browser now. Sorry, I'm trying to move the little thing out. Okay, so it's available. This is the AWS calculator. It's available at calculator.aws. And I just put together a super quick estimate here, so you could sort of see what this looks like. Again, this estimate, I just made this up while we were talking, or while Anna was talking. So this isn't a real estimate for any of your workloads, because I don't know exactly what you're doing. But just sort of to call out real quick, if you go to calculator.aws, I already have sort of some services in the estimate here, but you can always just sort of add any of the services that you're looking for. Not every service is on here, but the team tries to do a good job of getting them added. And so if there's something specific that you're looking to use, you can sort of put it on here and it'll show you how it's priced. Again, all of this pricing is public. There's nothing sort of secretive here. You don't need to talk to somebody to ask about the pricing or anything like that. All of the pricing is public, or I should say all of the pricing is public or better than public, right? So if some of you are sitting in large enterprises or something, you might have special deals, but they would only be better than public. So this sort of public would show you the most that you could potentially pay theoretically. So if we just take a look at sort of a common use case based on sort of the mental model I had before, say that you want to store some amount of data on the object store, so that's S3, and you wanted to process it using an EC2 instance. So on S3, if I just look at what this looks like, I said, don't worry about the storage classes for now. I just said I want to store 1 terabyte of data a month. There are some other nuances here, but your big price is going to be the storage. So that was 1 terabyte a month. And then for EC2, I just said, I want something that looks like what I have sitting on my desk. So I want something with 2 CPUs and 4 gigabytes of RAM. If that's what's sitting on your desk, I feel a little bit sad for you. But I said, give me something that looks like that, because I know I can do the processing using a machine that looks like that. The thing said, the cheapest instance I can get to is this T4G medium, and it tells me a bit more about it. And you see the hourly cost here is 0.0336 cents, and said, yep, I only need 1 of those. And it gives me the price for that. So the important thing to remember is storage, especially something like S3, you're generally putting data in there and it stays in there, right? Of course, unless you're deleting it, but a lot of times data gets put in there and it just stays in there, or you add to it. So this is generally a monthly cost that you would see that would be pretty consistent. I don't want to go into it here now, but there are things that you can do, like put it in different storage classes to save you money and things like that. But I think that's sort of outside the scope here. For the EC2 though, it's really important to know you're only paying for the resources that you use. So for S3, you keep on paying for it because you keep on using the storage. For something like EC2, if you're not using it to compute something and you stop the instance, you're not paying for it anymore, right? And so you'll see this monthly fee of $27. That's basically, you have this thing on 100% of the time, month after month. If you only need it for 2 hours a day, or if you only need it for 1 minute, or you need it for 2 weeks in a month, your price would be prorated essentially, right? You're only paying for the amount that you use. So this number would go down from $27 a month to like $13 a month if you're only using it for 2 weeks out of the month. So that's sort of an important thing to know when you're looking at the calculator. And if you click some of the more advanced options, it will tell you like, is this 100% of the time used or lower? And so it can do some of that. So I just sort of wanted to show this to you all, because I know there have been some questions that came up around how to calculate the price of what you're doing. And the easiest way to do that is to think, what am I doing now? How am I going to do that in the cloud? There was a question, Jeff, I think this might have been your question, so I'll stop sharing my screen here. Jeff, I think this might have been one of your questions, was around sort of, it's really hard to know best practices especially for new paradigms like serverless and things like that. 100% agree, right? Like there is a learning curve for sure. And so the easiest sort of mental model is to think like, this is what I do on my desktop or my laptop. I just want to do that in the cloud. But that's not sort of getting you to the where the cloud shines a lot more, which is sort of the newer paradigms like serverless, which allow you to take advantage of the scale and the fact that you're only paying for the resources that you use as you use them. And so, but it's a bit of another mental shift when you're doing that. So there is a learning curve there. All right, so I want to answer some of the questions here. I'm not going to share my screen. I had some answers written down, but I should be able to remember them. I'm just going to go through the list, and I see some people plussing some of these. So I think this one's probably important for you. This is number 9 on the list. When creating a new AWS account, will the credit card get charged, assuming you're connected to credits or you're using the open data program? So we haven't really talked about the open data program too much, but the open data program is basically a way that we work with customers to make high value data. And this is, I mean, Anna sort of mentioned this, so I don't want to go over too much, but we pay for storage and egress of certain data sets. So that's that. I want to sort of set that aside because it's a bit of a separate thing from what a lot of you will be worried about. The other piece though is the credits. And so I think this is probably an answer to a couple of the questions. The way that credits work is that you would make a request for credits. And I know we have a mixed audience here of people who are sort of have access grants and those who don't. So this is sort of specifically to the access folks, but you would basically make a request for the credits. Once the credit code gets made in our system, the credit code is good for a year from that date. We will give you the credits, or the credits will be applied to your account. Depends on sort of how it works. But either way, we give you the code and you apply it to your account, or it'll get applied to your account immediately. But the important thing there is the credits are good until they are exhausted, or from 1 year from the date that they were created. And so, like, if you just keep that in mind, then this answers some of the other questions, which is, will the account ever be charged? If it's hooked up to credits? Well, it's only hooked up to credits for 1 year, right? And so after that year, or if all the credits are used, the account will start getting charged to whatever billing mechanism was added to the account when it was set up. Yeah, so if the credits expire, or if they get exhausted, so they get used up, the account will start to be charged. And it is from the date that the credits are created. So if you know that you're not going to be able to start the work immediately, let us know, but it's smarter to basically say like, hey, this is what I want, but I'm not going to be able to start the work until like 3 months down the road. So don't ask for the credits until 3 months down the road. Because if you ask for the credits today, we give you the credits today, they're just going to sit in the account unused, and you will essentially burn that first 3 months of the year not doing anything with the credits. And so there's a question about like, it doesn't matter with the account age or anything like that when you're applying the credits to it. The big piece is that once the credit is created, it's only good for 1 year or until it's all used up. There's a question around going over the credit amount. Try not to do that, right? When you make your estimates using the calculator, you can, I want to be careful here. You can add, I mean, you should add a little bit of padding, right? Like we look at the estimates. And so if you're just sort of tripling or doubling what you're asking for, that becomes pretty obvious. But if you're looking at something and you think you can get it done in 10 hours, it's okay to ask for 12, 13, 14 hours, right, of processing or something. Like we would rather you have the credits to get the work done than cut it so fine that you need to come back to us to ask for more credits, because it's harder to sort of get those follow-on credits. You know, don't double anything, but also don't feel the need to cut it so fine that you're running out of credits when you're trying to do the work. So if we have multiple, so I'll just start going down the list here. There's a couple plus ones on some of these. If we have multiple organizations on the proposal team, is each organization expected to submit and manage its own AWS account and AWS cloud credits? No. So, I mean, the answer is sort of, it's really up to you and how you want to run it. It can be done different ways, but I would generally say, and this sort of goes back to a lesson learned from the document, is in that if that's the sort of case, it may be easier for one of the organizations to create a parent account and then use their organizations to link the other accounts. It's very easy to track credit usage at or resource usage at an account level. And so then what would happen is the total credits would go to the parent account, and then all the individual accounts for the different organizations would just pull out of that same pot of credits. And then there's a question about sort of monitoring the usage. So at the account level, it's very useful. You can go in the billing console and you can see the usage amongst the various accounts. So that's sort of an easy way to do that. There are other ways that you can do it, right? The pro and con of something like AWS is there's a million different ways to do things. But for clarity, and like I said, accounts don't cost anything. So it's sometimes easy just to create the accounts, have the credits, have the one pool of credits attached at the top level, and then have all the sub accounts just pull from that.
Joe, this is Annie. Could you quickly clarify? So if you have that parent account, so say a parent account sets it up, and then you're adding everyone through IAM. So you've added a bunch of users with the different permissions. They're all on the same project. Can you still go through and through what mechanism can you see how people are using, are spending if they've just been added through IAM with like this parent account?
Well, so if you only have the one account, like you don't really have a parent account, you just have one account, right?
Yeah.
I guess it is by definition the parent account, but you don't have any children account, I guess. And so you can tag IAM users, you can tag IAM roles. It's also probably best practice to have them tag whatever resources they create, and then the billing console will let you see billing by different tags. So I'd say you probably to be sort of most prescriptive, just tag everything, right? Tag the users, tag the roles that you give. We didn't really talk about roles, but roles are things that you can give to other services to act on behalf of other services and things like that. So it does get a little bit complicated, but it's sort of a step beyond just the user level. But then also when that user creates an EC2 instance, for example, they can just tag the EC2 instance. And then you can see the billing there. There's no way, at least that I currently know of, and we just had our big user conference in December. So,
Hi, hold on. Wait now. Oh.
Okay, I think that wasn't for me.
Yeah.
I thought they knew something that got announced, because what I was going to say was that some of this could have changed, but I don't believe so. There's no way to, at least within AWS, the stuff that AWS provides, there's no way to sort of limit the spend of a user or an account. You sort of have to monitor it and then shut it off. There are tools that do exist, they're third-party tools. And I know, for example, well, some of the groups on here do have access to those third-party tools to sort of monitor and be a bit more prescriptive about what happens when somebody goes over a budget. But the AWS doesn't sort of have an all-encompassing solution to do that. It more lets you monitor, and then you need to take some action once you've sort of reached that limit. But yeah, Andy, I think some of the question or some of the answer to your thing is just tag everything, and you can use the billing console to see.
Great, thank you. So I did. It's 12:30. So this was my 15-minute check-in. I did want to see if we wanted to go, and I want to just make sure. This is super useful for everyone. So one option could be we could break out into sort of two groups around maybe the identity and access management, since there are lots of questions about that. we could choose a couple groups to break out into, and people could share some of these lessons learned amongst the groups. Or while we have Joe on the hook, we can continue to go through questions. So I'm going to, let's see if I could just quit. I'm going to see what the group feels like doing here. And so could people put a just quick preference, and I'm going to count, say breakout if you think we should break out, or if you want to just keep having questions answered, put the word questions in the chat. So if everyone could do that now, and if you don't vote, you'll just be subject to what everyone kind of feels like doing. So questions and answers, questions. All right. Questions, Q&A. Okay, Joe. Like,
okay, this is
break.
Okay.
Okay.
This is very scary. I don't
Okay, I'll stop talking so you can get through as many of these as possible.
Cool. And then well, okay, yeah, why don't we just do this? I'll just keep going through the list so to make sure that you add your question to the list instead of just sort of opening it up. Okay, so let's see, answer that one. Okay, number 2, are new AWS accounts provided, or are we supposed to establish an AWS account through our organization? So this is actually a question for your organization. Or I can say we do not provide an account for you. There's nobody on the AWS side who will provide or create an account for you. So either you need to go to your organization and ask them how to get an AWS account, or you need to create one yourself, whatever would be most appropriate for your situation. But unequivocally, AWS will not create an account for you. We sort of don't do that and have no ability to do that. What happens if you don't use all your credits? They just expire. So if you have credits remaining at the end of the year, they will expire. That's a pretty quick one. We sort of answered number 5 already. What if you need more credits? Is there a timeline? Okay, I think, Amy, we sort of answered this one for you as well. It's just to sort of reiterate, is there a timeline where we lose the credits if we don't have a connected account? The credits are good for 1 year from the date they're created. So make sure to get your maximum usage of credits, you would make sure that you have an account for them to go. And actually, when you submit the credit request, you have to give us an account number. So it sort of forces you to have an account. Make sure that account is using your organizational email address. So this is an issue that happens sometimes. Just to pick a group like NOAA or something, right? Or well, I guess these are mostly for accessing. So NASA, or sorry, if you're at a university, right? University of Wisconsin, and you're going to create an account or otherwise have an account that you want to use, you should make sure that account is attached to a University of Wisconsin email address, because if it comes to us and it's like a Gmail address or something, that sort of raises flags in our system. So you should make sure that account that you give to us to have the credits applied to is using an institutional email address. I think I sort of said this, but just to sort of read it, if my research group has AWS credits, is there any way to limit the maximum credits per user of the group? There's really not, at least not with native AWS things. Like I said, there are other third-party solutions that you can look up. I don't know why I'm being so suspect about saying that. Like CloudTamer, I don't know all of them, I guess I should say, is why I'm sort of not saying it, but CloudTamer should be one. If you're just sort of an individual, I don't think you're gonna sort of be the right use case for using something like CloudTamer, but some of the organizations on here already have access to it, so it might be an answer for you. But just sort of out of the box, AWS doesn't let you sort of limit that. It'll let you monitor it, but then you need to sort of do something when you hit the threshold that you're looking at. So number 7, we've been given the recommendation to apply AWS credits to root accounts, not to sub accounts, instead of turning off cost sharing on sub accounts. Is that still recommended, and why? So fellow Joe, I think this recommendation, it's not, I don't think it's an AWS recommendation. It's probably just for your specific case. You can sort of go any of the paths that are allowed to you with our services. So sort of just to sort of clarify what you're sort of saying there is, I sort of alluded to this earlier, but when you have one parent account and then children accounts, you can, by default, credit sharing is enabled. So any of the children accounts will pull credits against the top level of the parent account. You can disable credit sharing, which means that any of the children accounts would be on their own. They would basically be paying on their own. And so just be aware that there's these different patterns that you can use. And I think it's going to be different for each group, whichever one makes the most sense for them. One difficulty, and this is something to know sort of internally, when you get credits, we often ask you to disable credit sharing if you're a sub account or a child account. The reason being, if you have a sort of a parent account that your organization has and there's 100 sub accounts, and you're a researcher with one sub account, and you say, hey, great, I got $10,000 in credits, it gets applied to your account, but it immediately rolls up to the parent account. And if there's 99 other sub accounts, they will also burn through that same credit, right? And so you as the researcher on the one account say, hey, my $10,000 in credits are gone right away because everyone else used them. And it becomes very difficult to sort of track depending on how your organization is sort of tracking it across. So if you are a sub account and you want to get credits into that sub account, we will generally ask you or have you confirm that you want credit sharing on or off, right? Because if you leave credit sharing on, the credits will immediately go up to the parent account, which may be what you want or may not be what you want. It just depends on how your organization's tracking it. I think that was number 7. Number 8, can we use existing AWS account in our organization that has been unused for a while? Yes, there's no sort of age thing here on the accounts. The only exception, and this isn't really what your question is, but the only exception is if that account is suspended for some reason, which would likely happen if you like used it and then never paid the bills, so like the account is suspended, then it would be a problem. But if you created an account 5 years ago and nobody's touched it, you're fine. I mean, there's no problem with that as long as you can log back into it. I covered number 9. That was will like a credit card ever get charged? Assuming they're connected to credits. Yeah, well, once the credits are exhausted or exhausted or expired, the billing mechanism attached to the account, which is sometimes a credit card, sometimes not, but the account will start billing like normal. So this number 10, this is around the users and IAM and tagging. Andy, this is a bit of what the question you asked, so I think we covered that. Number 11, I'm just going to actually skip. Sorry, Sean. I think it's probably a little bit outside of this. And honestly, I don't really have a good answer for you. It's basically the difference between cloud storage processing and like HPC, like on-prem HPC. I think I'm probably not going to be able to answer that one on the fly, but sort of reach out to us and we can sort of help you with a longer answer there. 13 was how much will it cost? I showed you the calculator. So the big thing for you all, and this is sometimes difficult, and we get this, and we can work with you on this, but you need to be able to sort of define what your process is, and then figure out how it maps into the cloud, which is easier to do if you're just saying, I get a virtual computer and I get some amount of storage. It's a little bit harder if you're trying to shift how you do everything. But even in the case where you just say, I get a virtual machine and I get storage, it's sometimes hard because you just think of having a machine sitting in front of you, and it is what it is, and you do your work in a certain amount of time. So it's sometimes hard to be able to come up with solid requirements. And we get that, but we can work with you there, but we will need to see a cost estimate that's justified for the credit proposal. Number 14, yeah.
Do you just want to add on that one that like when they're doing the cost estimates, they're not required to use those instance types. So if you do a cost estimate based on something like a 4 GPU and 16 gigabytes memory, and then you realize, oh, I actually need 32 on the machine, you're able to just switch instance types to that. Of course, you know, the credit amount that you get stays the same.
Yep, awesome, thanks, Zach. Yeah, so at the end of the day, you will receive a certain amount of credits and you can use those credits however you like, right? You're not, the estimator is just to help you come up with an estimate. You're not tied to those services or anything like that. And to be honest with you, if you sort of start with the initial mental model of I need a virtual machine and I need some storage, not always true, but generally true. If you sort of shift to some of the more cloudy paradigms like serverless and stuff, you will generally see your cost go down by a lot. And so starting with the easier mental model will often get you a credit amount that you can work within, even if you want to work with some of the other services. So awesome, thank you, Zach. Number 14 is super interesting. How important is the choice of region for an organization looking to host a large collection of data? So regionality is important for two reasons. Latency Latency and cost. So latency is sort of easy, right? There's the speed of light. There's a network that the data is traveling over. If you are storing the data in a data center sitting on the East Coast of the US and you're trying to run the processing in a data center located on the West Coast of the US, it will take longer to get access to that data because it's got to go across the US than if you are working with the processing in the same region as the data. The other piece to consider, and this sort of depends on what end of the data sharing piece here you are, is there is a cost for any data egress, right? So if you make data available in the cloud and that data leaves an S3 bucket and goes out to the public internet, there is an egress cost for that. So if you are a data sharing organization, you want to have the data egressed out of the cloud as little as possible. And you would want the data to be worked with in the cloud, in the same region as much as possible because there is no egress cost for that piece. The other so that's generally a data provider side. Where this actually gets flipped onto the data user is, and again, this is sort of a cloudy concept, it's not AWS specific, but for these object stores, there's a property called something like requester pays, that's what we call it. There should be a similar idea for other cloud providers as well. And so what that says, and the reason why this is important for some of you, is the USGS Landsat data, for example, is made available in a requester pays bucket. Some of the Sentinel-2 data products are made available in requester pays products on AWS, requester pays buckets, sorry. So what that means is that if you were trying to request that data, so this is the data user now, so you as the data user are trying to get that data, the cost to egress the data then rolls to you. And you have to agree to that, right? This isn't a secret, so like it's not a got you, right? You basically need to programmatically agree to that cost when you request the data. So if you're working with the data in the same region, there's no egress cost. If you're working with that data out of the region, there is an egress cost. It just sort of depends on whether it goes to the data provider or the data user, right? But if data is flowing over pipes, there is a cost associated with that. So having the data sit in the same region or having the processing being done in the same region where the data is good for latency reasons. Closer by means lower latency, and also there are potentially monetary considerations as well. But that's a very good one, and it's a question that's very timely and ongoing, because if you look at the regions where some of the large geospatial data providers are putting their data, some of it's ending up on the East Coast of the US and some of it's ending up on the West Coast. So we are sort of in a split model at the moment. Let's see, so number 15. Do we have to do anything special to set up an account and credits for personal use? So Ethan, I don't know what you mean by personal use here, but maybe this is somewhat answered by sort of the organizational email piece that I said earlier. If you mean, well, if you mean personal, as in like you're using ethan@gmail.com, which you have, congratulations, you were in early. But if you're using sort of a personal email address, you can't really get sort of the credits coming from this program into that one, right? Because these are supposed to be going to organizational units. If you mean it's like it's for your personal use within EPA, then I think you're sort of back to that would be a question for your own organizational IT people, I think. Yeah. Can you all do a live demo of how to set up a project using a few services? Not now, but I think we can probably point you to something. I don't know if it'll be a live demo, but we certainly have some tutorials that we can sort of point you to that may be helpful. Yeah, so, oh man, people are putting in questions as I reach the end. This is never ending.
I have one if I could just say it while they're typing.
Yeah, of course.
Sure.
This is Amy McVeigh. Has had many questions on there. So I'm part of the Access program, and this is a multi-year thing. And so each year we have to apply for the credits, and then we're gonna have lots of storage. So I can't really have a gap in those credits. So I just need to time my application, or can I apply before my previous credits are expired for the new ones?
Yeah, so I think actually, Anna, this might be some of a question for you because I'm not sure how we defined how to sort of do it year over year. But Amy, just broadly to your question, if you have one credit on the account and it's expiring at say the end of the year, and you're coming up towards the end of the year, yes, definitely you'll want to apply before you hit the end of the year, and then you can have another credit that's applied before the end of the year, and so there's no gap in them.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And then number 17, the answer is this is a definite no, because I had to look up what this is. And I don't know how to pronounce it. Usually for names like this, they put in a pronunciation guide. Horovod, I don't know. So you can definitely tell. I cannot give you any direction towards using this. So just for everyone else in the call, it was about using, this looks like a distributed deep learning training framework for a number of different machine learning languages here. So unfortunately, I cannot answer that. I don't have any experience with that. If you want to reach out to us, thank you. I'm assuming Anonymous Panda might be Zach. I don't know.
Yeah.
But somebody just put in, thank you. Somebody just put in a link. Awesome. So we've reached the end of the list. I know we've got about 12 minutes. I don't know, Annie, Anna, Zach, I don't know how we want to handle the last 12 minutes. I mean, we can open it up. I assume most of the people have got their questions in. If there's any follow-ups to anything I said, we can do that. I know I went through them pretty quickly.
Anna had to step off, so we still have Zach here. I also wanted to note that I added a resources list at the bottom with just a couple of the things that Joe mentioned. I also added the ESIP, an invitation to the ESIP Slack channel. We do have an AWS question channel that people have been throwing things into that community members are able to answer your questions. So it's a kind of non-intimidating space if you didn't want to go to Stack or to your AWS rep and just ask some of these questions. And a lot of the AWS folks that are on this call often pipe up to answer those questions. So just know about that. And yeah, with the last 10 minutes, maybe if we could have kind of just a popcorn open discussion, popcorn meaning just people piping up. And if they wanted to share in terms of those lessons learned or anything that they were blown away to find out or something that made their life a lot easier in terms of, I mean, you could tell this is a very 101 session. It's meant to be onboarding team. So it's like just those introductory lessons learned on when you've made those transitions. So for anyone, I'd invite that's on to turn your cameras on, and I'm going to change my view to grid view and to maybe have lessons learned. And I'd specifically ask any of those like Access folks or Joseph. I mean, we had talked during that Access call about lessons that we had learned just through managing AWS accounts. So not to put you on the spot, but anything that you have learned either the hard way or just want to share about your experience managing lots of our AWS accounts up at ASF, and maybe just introduce yourself since you happily put your camera on.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I'm Joe Kennedy. I'm at ASF. I actually started ASF just over a year ago and came from Earth system modeling background at DOE doing high performance computing. So the cloud was totally new for me. So a lot of the onboarding stuff was my personal lesson learned. ASF as an org is really good at cloud, I would say, and I have a lot of really good people to work with, so that's been super helpful. Definitely looking for those people is one of my biggest lessons learned, to ask questions. We found immediately we have a number of projects that we run different kind of like science prototyping, onboarding stuff into the cloud, and it's really helpful to have dedicated accounts specifically for those projects. It makes discussing with outside researchers what their costs are, what they're doing, that kind of stuff a lot easier. And using CloudFormation templates and that kind of stuff allows you to set up really similar kind of compute environments on a project by project basis. So I think someone said scripting everything. We leverage CI/CD pipelines as much as possible to do deployment stuff. And that really, really helps. And yeah, doing per project project accounts is super helpful.
Thanks, Joe. Joseph. Joe. Anyone else want to pop up with as they have made this transition, lesson learned? Philemon? Sure.
Hi, Annie. Nice to be back.
Great.
Well, we had been, this is Philemon, I'm with the Texas A&M Corpus Christi. I'm also affiliated with the Gulf of Mexico Coastal Ocean Observing System. It's one of those acronym loving group. One of the things I learned when I started to move some of our services to AWS are the acronyms themselves. They had been introducing a lot of these acronyms, and it's taking so much time and effort for me to go through the list. I have to do a Google search what it means, and good if they all have a common way to define things. So I will really appreciate if AWS will make extra effort to somehow get a page, like think of it as a cheat sheet to help us navigate through all these acronyms. I don't know whether the AWS folk can respond to this. So probably there are already pages out there that I haven't seen. I know there's one in Glick Flare, but it is so incomplete.
So it's a call for an acronym cheat sheet. All right. Well,
Yes.
if
Yeah, I don't know how you sit on a call with NASA and tell people they need to be better at their acronyms. I think you're pointing the finger at the wrong place here.
Well, if anyone knows of an AWS acronym cheat sheet and wants to put it in the resources, that's a good one. I can say, I had a really good one, then it just escaped my memory of one of my big lessons learned getting people in. Thanks, Zach.
With the acronyms thing, what I found was helpful is that just staying signed into the AWS console and just typing the acronym in the search bar. AWS's search bar is really good at taking an acronym and turning it into the name of the service and letting you point to it directly. So I almost never try to remember them. I just type them in the search bar and go.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I just linked to the docs page on AWS too, which I think has all of the acronyms not expanded there, but you can just Control F for whatever the acronym is, and then you'll be able to click on it to figure out what it actually is.
Thank you. One other resource that I would share is through ESIP, for those that are on the call that we've either helped enable do this already or are interested in it, within your different organizations, you have an AWS person, a rep that's associated likely with your organization. And what I've been able to facilitate for projects that are within the ESIP lab that use AWS resources is if they're curious about using a specific AWS resource, it's very that you can get on the phone with whomever your rep is, and they can find a solutions expert to walk you through that. So if you've heard about using AWS Neptune and you don't want to just go in and read the extensive documentation, and you really just want to be able to talk to someone to get a kind of an overview. They're not going to get into your, they're not going to log in and see what you're working with, but But if you're thinking about these types of things and you just want to talk to someone and get that overview, and you're working with a project through ESIP, I can facilitate that. Or likely if, and Joe could maybe expand, but if you're at JPL, you probably have a person that is your AWS rep, and you could say, I want to learn about using Neptune. Can I have someone please talk to me about it? Tell me the pitfalls. You can ask directed questions. And so depending on what your learning style is, if you love to read, if you like to get into the documentation, or if it would save you time to just have a conversation to learn about some of these services and getting over there, that it's a really fantastic, it's a great resource to be able to take advantage of. So I would highly recommend if getting in touch with whomever at your organization and setting that up, if you are thinking about making the transition or wanting to try new services, to just get that overview or an expert opinion before making that dive in. So that has been phenomenally helpful, both for I've used it and I've had other projects that are using AWS resources through ESIP talk to those people, and they have found it incredibly useful as well. With 3 minutes left, any last questions for Joe? You can just unmute or...
So I will actually take a speaker prerogative here and just sort of
Sure.
plus one something that Jeff DOB had said. So the learning curve is real, right? I mean, it gets easier as you go along. I know we were talking about 1 million services, but I mean, I think there's probably 5 to 10 that you would practically use on a regular basis. But it's still hard to know what those 5 to 10 are and how to use them effectively, right? So I think ESIP, the reason why I'm sort of plus owning this here is because I think ESIP is a facilitator for this, is a way to share the common knowledge, the things that worked, right, in some sort of forum, right? And I know anything you linked to the cloud computing cluster that's going on. So there are efforts underway to do that. But yeah, I live in fear of people needing to duplicate work for the sake of duplication, right? And so wherever possible, I'm a big fan of getting best practices, cloud formation templates, right, shared, so that people can easily get spun up and get going instead of fighting over the infrastructure.
Great, thanks, Joe. So with that, this document will continue to be open. It'll be linked through this session. And again, folks, I thank you so much for reminding about the cloud computing cluster. There is an active cloud computing cluster. The link in to join the mailing list for that, where you would find out about when they're meeting, is in the resources. The invitation to the ESIP Slack channel is there. And I would also do one last call out for, we do have a current RFP going through the lab that allows you to draw out of the ESIP's cloud credits. So ESIP lab projects run for about 6 months. You get up to $10,000 in cash if you are allowed to accept money. Most of our friends are not. And AWS cloud credits through ESIP. Just so for those of you that didn't know about that, I'm going to put it in chat. And with that, I would thank Joe for taking your time to answer all of these questions. Sarah, are you still on? Do you want to say any last words to any Access folks that are on?
So just if you have questions, I guess, email us. And I know that some things maybe are different for JPL, and we'll try to find you some answers about that just because of NASA regulations. So,
okay.
But thank you very much, Joe. This was really helpful. And I think a lot of people got questions answered.
Of course, yeah. Thank you very much for allowing us to be part of the community. It's fun. More fun in person. But...
yeah.
We're doing what we can. All right, I'm going to stop recording, and I'd also invite everyone to head to the coffee break or whatever break you need. If you look in Kiko chat, there is a room for the coffee break to join in and continue the conversation and share some more lessons learned. So thanks everyone so much, and we will see you soon.